On Thanksgiving Day, I arrived at my parents' house with my adopted son. My aunt scoffed, "Why didn't you get a real one?" I just said, "He's real enough to inherit everything." The next day, her daughter called me mom. Last Thanksgiving, I brought my newly adopted son to my parents' house for the first time. My aunt scoffed and said, "Why didn't you get a real one," in front of everyone? I calmly replied, "He's real enough to inherit everything." Later that night, my cousin, her daughter, confided in me that she wished I was her mom. Things have only gotten more complicated since then. I didn't think a 6-year-old could make me braver, but there I was, clutching Mateo's little hand as I walked up the porch steps of my childhood home. Asheville was cold that year, colder than I remembered, and the wind carried the smells of roasted turkey and chimney smoke through the air. Mateo looked up at me, wide-eyed and anxious. He had never seen this many people at once, never had a real family before. I squeezed his hand and smiled, trying to calm both of us. Inside, it was chaos. Laughter, clinking glasses, the familiar rattle of old cousins trying to one-up each other over casseroles. My mom was first to greet us, pulling me into a hug and dropping down to Mateo's level with the kind of warmth that melted my frozen nerves. I could feel every set of eyes on us, judging, calculating. Deborah didn't wait long. She swooped in, perfectly pressed in her high-end dress, the kind of outfit you wear to show everyone you can still afford to look better than them. She barely glanced at Mateo before turning her smirk on me. "Why didn't you get a real one?" she said, loud enough that the room paused. I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this. Months of whispered comments, raised eyebrows, and backhanded congratulations had steeled me. I just said, very calmly, "He's real enough to inherit everything," and turned away. The silence was thick. Mateo, thankfully, didn't understand. He just tugged my hand toward the dining room where the food was laid out. I focused on him, the only real thing in that entire house. Dinner was a blur of forced smiles and stiff conversation. Deborah kept flashing me her trademark pitying looks. Madison, her daughter, sat across the table, unusually quiet. Every time Deborah bragged about Madison's latest internship or her boyfriend's law school acceptance, Madison seemed to shrink smaller in her chair. Later, after pie and coffee, when Mateo had curled up with some cartoons and most of the adults had moved on to wine and politics, I found myself outside on the porch swing. The cold bit into my skin, but it felt good to breathe air that wasn't poisoned by fake pleasantries. Madison found me there. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, pulling her sleeves over her hands. We listened to the wind rattling the dead leaves in the gutters. Finally, she whispered, "I wish you were my mom." It came out so quietly, I wasn't sure I heard it right at first. I turned to her, and she was staring straight ahead, face pale but set. She started talking, slow at first, then faster, like if she didn't get it all out she'd never say it at all. About how Deborah had always treated her like a project. How every achievement was another brick in a wall she never asked to build. How the approval she craved was dangled just out of reach, a reward for being better, thinner, smarter, more obedient. She said she watched me that night. How I stood up for Mateo without raising my voice. How I looked at him like he was the best thing that ever happened to me. How nobody had ever looked at her that way. She said it made her realize she was tired, tired of performing, tired of being perfect, tired of living a life someone else had drawn for her. She said "Mom" again, this time barely a whisper, and it broke something inside me. I put my arm around her, and we sat there like that, two broken pieces fitting together in the dark. When she left the next morning, she hugged Mateo first. Told him he was awesome and gave him the kind of smile that doesn't cost anything. Then she hugged me, longer than necessary, and promised to call. I didn't expect her to actually do it. But she did. At first, quick texts. Then longer phone calls. Then full-blown video chats where she showed me her tiny dorm room and the projects she was working on, and told me about the boyfriend she wasn't sure she loved but felt trapped with anyway. Then in March, the call came. She was at the dorm bus station. She said she was done. She said she had packed 2 duffel bags, dumped her boyfriend, and needed somewhere to go. She was crying when she said, "Can I come home?" I told her yes without thinking. When I pulled up to the station, she was sitting on a bench under the buzzing fluorescent lights, looking so much younger and smaller than I remembered. Mateo was in the back seat, bouncing in excitement. She climbed into the car, hugged Mateo tight, and didn't let go for a long time. When we got home, our home, I made spaghetti because it's the only thing I can cook reliably. She sat at the counter, swinging her legs, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. That night, after Mateo was asleep, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Thank you for saving me." I wanted to tell her I hadn't saved her, she had saved herself. But I knew she wasn't ready to hear that yet. Instead, I said, "Welcome home, kid." The next few weeks passed in a haze of quiet adjustments. Madison settled into the guest bedroom like she had always belonged there. Her things, once neatly folded into 2 duffel bags, slowly took over the closet and the desk. She started calling it my room without realizing it, and every time she said it, I felt a knot loosen inside my chest. Mateo loved having her around. He followed her everywhere, showing her his crayon drawings, asking her a million questions about college and what real grown-ups do. She was patient with him in a way I hadn't expected, not the brittle patience you give when you're obligated, but the soft kind, the kind you give when you really care. Sometimes I caught her watching us, a strange look on her face when Mateo leaned into me or slipped his hand into mine without thinking. Like she was learning a language she should have known all along. We were figuring it out, the 3 of us. It wasn't perfect. Some mornings Madison stayed in bed too long, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she snapped at Mateo without meaning to and then apologized with red eyes. I didn't push. I knew enough about healing to recognize that sometimes just staying is enough. It didn't take long for Deborah to find out Madison had left. She called first. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted. "I know she's with you. This isn't over." By the 3rd day, she was at my front door. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was folding laundry while Mateo built a Lego city on the living room carpet. The doorbell rang like an alarm. I knew who it was before I even looked. Deborah stood there in a cream-colored trench coat, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, lips pinched tight. She looked thinner, sharper, like a blade you could cut yourself on. Without waiting for an invitation, she pushed past me into the house. Mateo looked up from his Legos, sensing the tension, and slipped away down the hall. "I want my daughter," she said. Her voice was low and controlled, the way people speak when they think rage gives them power. "She's not an object, Deborah," I said. I kept my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. "She's an adult. She's allowed to choose where she wants to be." She looked around the house like it disgusted her. The creaky floors, the slightly chipped paint, the photos of Mateo and me taped to the fridge. I knew what she saw: imperfection. Humanity. "This," she hissed, waving her manicured hand around, "isn't a family. It's charity work. It's pity." Before I could respond, Madison appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts and no makeup, and for the first time, she looked like herself. "I'm not going with you," she said simply. Deborah spun to face her. "Madison, don't be stupid. You're throwing away your future for this." Madison came down the stairs slowly, each step measured. When she reached the bottom, she stood next to me. Not behind me, next to me. "You threw away my future a long time ago," she said. Deborah's face crumpled for a second, just a flash, before she straightened it back into a sneer. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll come crawling back." "No," Madison said. "I won't." Deborah looked at me one last time, a glare that could have stripped paint off the walls. Then she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The silence afterward was heavy. Madison leaned against the wall and slid down to sit on the floor, burying her face in her hands. I knelt beside her, rubbing circles on her back. "You did good," I said quietly. "You did really good." She didn't say anything, but after a minute, she leaned into me. The fallout came fast. Deborah tried calling Madison's phone. Then mine. Then my parents'. She left voicemails full of threats, lawyers, court orders, family interventions. At first, Madison was terrified. Every buzz of her phone made her flinch. She started talking about going back, just to make it stop. But I told her the truth: Deborah couldn't force her. Madison was 21. An adult. Free to choose. It took a while, but slowly, Madison started believing it. We blocked Deborah's number. Changed Madison's email. I even took her down to the DMV to update her mailing address. The deeper reality was that Deborah wasn't fighting because she loved Madison. She was fighting because Madison was supposed to be the proof that Deborah had succeeded. Without her, the story Deborah told the world about her perfect life, her perfect daughter, unraveled. Weeks stretched into months. Spring came, and the cherry blossoms in our neighborhood started to bloom. Mateo brought home seed packets from school, and we spent a weekend tearing up the backyard, planting messy rows of zinnias and sunflowers. Life started to settle into something that felt real. Madison got a part-time job at a bookstore downtown. She signed up for classes at the local community college to finish her degree. Mateo started calling her Maddie like it was the most natural thing in the world. One evening, after dinner, we were sitting in the backyard, watching Mateo chase fireflies. Madison had her knees pulled up to her chest, a glass of lemonade sweating in her hand. She said, "I feel like I can breathe for the first time." I didn't say anything. I just watched Mateo spinning through the grass, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. The peace didn't last. Deborah wasn't done with us. One morning, Madison got a letter, thick, official-looking, with her mother's handwriting scrawled angrily across the front. Inside was a notice: Deborah was contesting Madison's financial independence. She claimed Madison was still her legal dependent, that she had the right to access certain accounts Madison had been trying to close. She was trying to pull Madison back under her control, legally if not emotionally. Madison read the letter at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. "I thought it was over," she said, voice small. I sat down across from her, steadying my voice. "It's not over," I said. "But you're not alone." Madison swallowed hard. "What if she wins?" I looked her straight in the eye. "She won't." But even as I said it, a cold weight settled in my stomach. The next few days blurred into a rush of phone calls and paperwork. I wasn't an expert in law, I was just a woman who had learned to survive, but I knew enough to know we needed help. I found a local lawyer, Mrs. Karen Shaw, who specialized in family law and guardianship issues. Her office was cramped and smelled faintly of old coffee, but the moment I met her, I knew she was the right one. She had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from fighting too many battles against people who thought they could buy their way out of consequences. Madison was nervous during the first meeting, twisting the strap of her purse around and around in her hands, but Mrs. Shaw was patient. She explained everything clearly. Madison was legally an adult, fully responsible for herself. Deborah's claims didn't have much ground unless she could prove Madison was incapable of managing her own affairs, which was laughable considering Madison had been living independently for months. Still, Deborah had money and connections, and that meant she could make life difficult if she wanted to. "We'll have to be careful," Mrs. Shaw warned. "Expect her to dig. She'll try to make you look unstable, irresponsible, anything she can." Madison nodded, her face pale but set. She didn't say much during that meeting. I knew she was scared. I also knew she wasn't going to run. Back at home, the atmosphere shifted. There was a tension now, a tightness under everything we did. Mateo picked up on it, though he couldn't understand the details. He started clinging to Madison more, sensing the storm even if he didn't know what caused it. One evening, I found them curled up together on the couch, Mateo asleep on her shoulder, and Madison staring blankly at the TV, not really watching. I sat down beside her and gently brushed a piece of hair out of Mateo's face. "You're doing better than you think," I said softly. Madison blinked, like she hadn't realized she was crying. She wiped her cheeks quickly and gave me a shaky smile. "I just don't want to mess him up," she whispered. "You won't," I said. "Loving him is enough." And she did love him. It wasn't something you could fake, not with Mateo. He trusted instinctively, but he also knew when love was real. The hearing was scheduled for mid-May. It wasn't a trial, just a formal review to dismiss Deborah's petition, but it felt enormous. Like everything we had built together could crumble in a single afternoon. The morning of the hearing, Madison barely touched her breakfast. Mateo, sensing the gravity of the day, wrapped his arms around her waist and refused to let go until she promised she'd be home for dinner. At the courthouse, Deborah was already waiting. She looked immaculate, every hair in place, her outfit screaming wealth and control. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he charged by the minute just to breathe, stood stiffly beside her. Madison's hands shook as she signed the last of the paperwork. I squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this," I said. The hearing itself was mercifully short. Mrs. Shaw laid out the facts calmly and efficiently. Madison's age. Her employment. Her grades. Her residency. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes, listened carefully, occasionally nodding. Deborah's lawyer tried to argue that Madison had been unduly influenced by me, that she was isolated and emotionally vulnerable. He painted a picture of manipulation, of an unstable environment. But Madison didn't flinch. When the judge asked if she wanted to remain independent, she stood tall and said, clear as a bell, yes, I do. When the dismissal came, it was almost anticlimactic. The judge barely hesitated. Petition denied. Deborah's face twisted in rage, but she kept it under control until we were outside the courthouse. There, on the steps, she hissed at me. This isn't over. I didn't respond. I just took Madison's hand, and we walked away. We stopped for ice cream on the way home, partly for Mateo and partly for us. Madison ordered a double scoop of mint chocolate chip and laughed when it melted faster than she could eat it. It was a small, messy, perfect moment. A victory. But even as we celebrated, I knew better than to think Deborah would give up so easily. Sure enough, the letters started coming again, this time dripping with venom. Threats about disinheritance. Accusations of brainwashing. Empty promises that if Madison just came home, everything could go back to normal. Madison stopped reading them after the third one. She put them straight into a shoebox and slid it under her bed. I don't want her words in my head anymore, she said. Life settled back into a rhythm, but it was different now, heavier, more cautious. Madison was free, but freedom wasn't the same as healing. Some nights she woke up from nightmares, gasping and disoriented. I would find her sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, staring into the dark. I didn't always know what to say. Sometimes I just sat with her, let the silence be enough. Mateo helped more than either of us realized. His unconditional love, the way he accepted Madison without hesitation or expectations, slowly pulled her out of herself. Spring melted into summer. Madison's birthday came around, her first one away from Deborah's control. She didn't want a big party. She just wanted a quiet night at home, pizza, a movie, Mateo decorating the living room with crayon-drawn posters. When she blew out her candles, she didn't make a wish. She just looked around the room, at me, at Mateo, at the silly decorations, and smiled. Later that night, as I was cleaning up, she hugged me from behind, tight and sudden. Thank you for giving me a real family, she whispered. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. But peace never lasts long when someone is determined to destroy it. 2 weeks later, Mateo's school called. They said a woman had come by, asking questions about him. Said she was a relative. They didn't give her any information, thankfully. But it was a warning. Deborah wasn't just coming after Madison anymore. Now she was coming after Mateo. The call from Mateo's school shook me in a way nothing else had. I had expected Deborah to lash out at Madison. I hadn't expected her to drag Mateo into it. I spent that night awake, lying in the dark, running over every possibility. I thought about what she might be planning, about how much damage she could do if she got even a sliver of control over Mateo's life. The thought of losing him, of having our little family torn apart, made me physically ill. The next morning, I met with Mrs. Shaw again. This isn't a custody issue, she reassured me. Deborah has no legal standing. She's not related to Mateo. She has no rights. But that didn't mean she couldn't cause trouble, couldn't make calls, file false claims, stir up investigations. Deborah was smart. She knew she couldn't win in court. But she also knew how to make people's lives heal through sheer persistence. I decided right then, I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I was going to end this, cleanly, legally, permanently. It was Madison who came up with the plan, late one night, as we sat on the back porch watching Mateo chase fireflies again. I think I know how to stop her, she said, picking at the fraying hem of her jeans. She told me about the skeletons in Deborah's closet, the charity money misplaced during one of her fundraising galas. The hush-hush payouts to former employees who threatened lawsuits. The facade of perfection hiding a mountain of shady deals. You just have to make her care about something more than me, Madison said quietly. Her reputation. It was risky. It wasn't guaranteed to work. But it was the only real weapon we had. Over the next few weeks, we gathered everything, Madison's old emails, messages from people who used to work for Deborah, public records of her nonprofit's financials. Nothing earth-shattering alone, but together they painted a clear picture, fraud, mismanagement, unethical behavior. Mrs. Shaw connected us with a local journalist, someone who had a reputation for exposing corruption, someone who didn't scare easily. We didn't sell Deborah out all at once. That would have been too easy, and too obvious. Instead, little pieces started appearing online. Quiet at first. Anonymous tips. Questions about certain donations that didn't add up. Interviews with former staffers willing to talk once they realized they weren't alone. It didn't take long for the whispers to grow into something louder. Deborah's carefully curated life started to crumble. She tried to deny everything, of course. Tried to smear the journalist, to threaten lawsuits. But the story had traction now, and people were digging deeper. Her friends in Asheville's social circles, the same people who used to hang on her every word, started pulling away. Invitations stopped coming. Charity boards asked her to step down pending investigation. Deborah's world, built on appearances and power, collapsed under its own weight. And the best part was, we didn't have to do anything more. We just sat back and watched as she destroyed herself trying to cling to a life that was slipping through her fingers. I thought she might show up at our house one last time, desperate, furious. But she didn't. She disappeared instead. I heard from an old neighbor that she sold her house, moved somewhere smaller. Rumor had it she was trying to rebuild, but without her name, without her reputation, she was just another person struggling to be important again. Meanwhile, our life moved on. Madison flourished. She graduated with honors from her program. Got a job at a local publishing house. She started dating someone new, a quiet, kind man who looked at her like she hung the moon. Mateo thrived. He grew taller, lost his first tooth, won a blue ribbon at the school art fair. He told anyone who would listen about his cool big sister and his awesome mom. One afternoon, as we were driving home from the farmer's market, Madison turned to me out of nowhere and said, "Do you ever regret any of it?" I didn't even have to think about it. "No," I said. "Not for a second. Because sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose you, the ones who fight for you, stand by you, rebuild you when others tear you down. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about living so fully, so loudly, so joyfully, that their hatred shrivels up and blows away like dust." We didn't just survive Deborah. We left her behind. And we built something better.